Tyrantrum and Aurorus are peak fossil Pokemon. Making their debut in Generation 6, there were already a good number of fossil Pokemon filling out the roster. Covering a decent range of typical prehistoric animals, it was about time to introduce even more actual dinosaurs. So that's where Tyrant and Aurorus came in. The more recent additions to fossil Pokemon had them relegated to side adventures, but now in Pokemon X and Y, they were brought to the forefront as the location in which you attained them served as a stop on the journey, because one of the first times that you meet Team Flare, they've taken over the Glittering Cave. Once you defeat them, you're given the choice between a Jaw fossil and a Sail fossil, which when revived will present you with a Tyrant or Aurorus. And I love these two, they're such cute little designs that capture more of a baby look to their respective evolutions, looking like characters straight out of Land Before Time. The Pokédex has some interesting things to say about them, noting that Tyrant acts like a spoiled brat while Aurorus was restored successfully. They lead perfectly into their evolutions Tyrantrum and Aurorus, which make a great pair of Pokemon, being based on a large theropod and a long-necked sauropod. Funny how it took this long to get an actual Tyrannosaurus Pokemon, but it finally happened, all hail the king. Both of these Pokemon were designed by artist Hitoshi Ariga, who has worked on a lot of Pokemon illustrations and is a big dinosaur fan in real life. So getting to see these Pokemon use inspirations of various dinosaurs while incorporating fantastical elements is so cool to see. I think these are some near-perfect Pokemon designs. The more Pokédex entries we see of these two paint a better picture and give us some more details about how the fossil restoration actually works. For one thing, with both Tyrant and Tyrantrum, it's theorized that their present-day forms are very different from their original looks. Tyrantrum is said to possibly have been covered in feathers in its Ultra Sun Pokédex entry. This is a nod to research that suggests this was the case for many theropod dinosaurs, including the Tyrannosaurus. But of course, in various media, we often see the more scaly representation because it kinda looks a bit cooler, evoking dragon-like imagery even though dragons don't really exist. The point is that I think Tyrantrum is actually a pretty good middle point. The crest around its neck is a good way to break up the colors a bit while giving it a distinct shape, as well as the implication of feathers while maintaining the scaly aesthetic. But like I said, this implies a lot about the restored fossil Pokemon and gives credence to the fan theories of it being imperfect, that the prehistoric Pokemon looked a lot different than they do now after being brought back to life. Meanwhile, Aurorus and Aurorus are said to have been preserved in ice, therefore they were able to be restored basically perfectly, though they're still part rock type just like any other fossil Pokemon. Again, along with that fan theory about the restoration process being imperfect, is that all the prehistoric Pokemon are partially rock type because they became rock after being fossilized. I personally think that just all ancient Pokemon were part rock type anyway because of how Aerodactyl's DNA was preserved in the Old Amber, Relicanth remains unchanged since prehistoric times, and now Aurorus and Aurorus are said to have been preserved in ice. Weirdly enough, both Tyrantrum and Aurorus give some evidence to either fan theory about fossil restoration, but hey, I think they look cool anyway. Oh, and the fact that they're both red and blue is yet another fantastic use of classic Pokemon colors. Ever since it made its debut in Pokemon X and Y, Tyrantrum has become one of my favorite Pokemon because of how straight it plays the whole Tyrannosaurus design, and using Dragon as a secondary typing just made it even better. I'm glad I own this Tyrant plush as a little commemorative piece. Years ago I went to Round 1, this arcade and bowling alley that was cool except for the fact that they told me to stop recording. Anyway, the prize room was just filled with a bunch of cool stuff, and as soon as I spotted the Tyrant plush, I knew I had to win as many tickets as I could. So here I am today with my very own little buddy. I think these Pokemon are in a pretty weird spot, or at least Generation 6 as a whole is. Sure, we know that Pokemon Legends ZA is on the horizon, but the original games are old enough to now be nostalgic and deserving of a remake, yet they are not old enough to have reached full retro status, thus getting even more attention. Basically, merchandise of Kalos Pokemon other than the starters isn't all too easy to come by, so that's one reason I'm really happy to be getting that new game, and it looks like the recent influx of more plush toys will help us get ready for just that. Both of these Pokemon had some pretty great moments in the anime as well. Tyrantrum first appeared in the episode The Tiny Caretaker, where Team Rocket sneak into a research facility in which they kidnap a baby Tyrant. It escapes and then gets lost in the wild, where the next morning it gets rescued by our main characters and begins a friendship with Bonnie, who just happens to be wearing Tyrantrum pajamas. Overall, it's a cute little episode, mostly focusing on their day together, and was a fun idea to pair them up. Tyrant even evolves into a full Tyrantrum to help save Bonnie once Team Rocket shows up to try and steal it back. As you would expect, she doesn't get to keep her new Pokemon friend because it actually belongs to the scientists back at the research center where they house a bunch of other fossil Pokemon, including the other Tyrantrum. While I think Bonnie as a character works best by not getting to keep these Pokemon or any of the others that she befriends throughout the series aside from Dedenne, which technically belongs to Clement in the first place, part of me just wanted it to happen though because I'd always wanted to see a fossil Pokemon as part of the main cast. That would happen later on, but I kinda wanted it sooner. Aurorus appears in the episode Come Back Into the Cold, which actually aired pretty early on in the series, well before the previous episode. While in Ambrit Town, the main cast is joined by Alexa, who's there to see the newest discoveries at the Fossil Restoration Center. Here there's another facility where they house restored fossil Pokemon, those being Aurora and Aurorus. They also give that little backstory about how the remains were found in frozen ice, and that allowed them to restore the Pokemon. Kinda neat how both of these episodes are able to do something a little different with how they introduce the Pokemon and where things go from there. What remains the same though is that Team Rocket shows up to steal the baby, and so it's up to our heroes, joined by the parent Aurorus, to track them down. It's also pretty neat how we see the connection between the two Pokemon represented through Aurora, the phenomenon after which they're named. They reach the bad guys, have a big battle, and then reunite the fossil Pokemon before bringing them back to the freezer room where they can stay cool. I like this episode as well, yet another cute little way of giving these Pokemon their own little spotlight for a moment, and I do like that both evolution lines weren't just put into one episode together. I mean, we see here that these aren't Pokemon that lived in the same area back in prehistoric times. Just because they were both Pokemon brought in during the same generation doesn't mean there's a relation between the two. One of Amora's Pokédex entries specifically says that the land in which it lived was devoid of predators like Tyrantrum. Not only do their color palettes show how they're built different and live in separate climates, but their evolution methods, being that they only evolve in daytime for Tyrantrum and nighttime for Aurorus, show it very effectively. We usually only see the lush and humid jungle aesthetic for prehistoric Pokemon, but I would love to see even more of a frozen tundra look if we end up getting like prehistoric animals as fossil Pokemon in the future. And speaking of tundra, the Crown Tundra is probably one of my favorite places in Pokemon, just for the fact that it gives us a place to see basically every fossil Pokemon out in the wild in a habitat that suits them pretty well. In the snowy areas close to the Dynamax Adventures, you can find little Amora hanging out in the grass, probably chilling the exact same way they did back in their time. And further up on the snowside slope, there is a wandering Aurorus that likes to say hi if you walk up to it. Closer to the Dynamax tree, there are Tyrant walking around enjoying the warmer area with trees that they no doubt love. And there's also a wandering Tyrantrum that I always love seeing. This has got to be one of my favorite encounters in a Pokemon game. I would only wish that the large areas like this in Sword and Shield were even bigger, because I feel that a big guy like this deserves the space. With the overworld encounters in this game, we're able to see just how big these Pokemon are. I mean, their height listed in the game was always at over 8 feet tall, but seeing it before my very eyes makes me realize that yeah, these are the biggest fossil Pokemon we've ever had. Well, that's just about everything to say when it comes to Tyrantrum and Aurorus, basically just the peak design for a fossil Pokemon. They do still feel relatively new just because we haven't seen them all that much. With all fossil Pokemon, it is a bit weird because yeah, you can obtain them by reviving a fossil, but you rarely see them as wild encounters. As such, they feel like they're a lot less prominent than other Pokemon. Tyrant and Amora were available in Generation 7 as transfer Pokemon or other restored fossils, but it was really in Sword and Shield's Crown Tundra where they made their biggest impression beyond their anime appearances. And now being absent from Generation 9 at the moment, I'm really on the edge of my seat to see them hopefully return in Legends EA. So let me know what you think about these two Pokemon and which one is your favorite. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the video so far, and are looking forward to even more as we continue Fossil Week. Thanking every channel member for your continued support, including the Great Gators, Cemetery Hill, Peel the Genius, SB Jump, Caruli Stromboli, Justin Dowes, Al Rome, Pastel Blood, Cosmo Zero, Mr. Saturn, Rainfrux, Cheez-It62, Switch Cheese, Michael Snyder, Lockadox, Gallantry, Gator Kid 509, TF, Cheeseburger Lasers, Mathaclock 947, The Shadow and Josh Show, Taijirai, Justin R, Phantom, and Quago. If you would like to support, see your name here, and get access to emotes for comments, live streams, and sometimes watch videos early, you can become a channel member today. You can also follow me on Twitter as well for more memes. Anyway, this is GatorX, and I'll catch you all later.
Pokemon trading card game XY Furious Fists with Mega Lucario EX and Mega Heracross EX. Your opponents won't know what hit them. In stores now. Each booster pack of 10 cards sold separately. Cards vary by pack.